Hello, and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm especially delighted to have with us one of my favorite authors from years gone by, Sarah Strohmeyer, whose new book is We Love to Entertain. Before we begin today, I'd like to let those tuning in know the Poison Pen does have copies of many of Sarah's books, including her new book, and we would be delighted to hold one or more for you or put them in the mail. Just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen. And now I would like to welcome Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me again, virtually.
Thank you for joining us today. My first question for authors is, what can you tell us about your life before you became published? If I remember correctly, I saw a quote from you that your life was a series of unexpected choices, lucky breaks, and unprotected sex.
Right. I'm afraid that's all too common, Well, it's been a long time since I've not been published. My first book came out in 2000, and before that or 2001, before that I was a newspaper reporter. So I guess back in the days when I was much, much younger, I was a journalist and mother and teacher for a brief horrible period of time because I was just so awful at it.
Oh.
And all of those are great preparations to becoming an author.
You actually started writing as a journalist, if I remember correctly, when you were 16 or so?
Well, I started working at a newspaper when I was about 16 doing, small business stories. And then I progressed to doing night obits and rewrite, something that doesn't exist anymore, where literally the reporter would call up and say, "Hello, sweetheart, get me rewrite." I don't even know if that makes any sense to a younger generation, but I would take down the story because there was no internet, and it would be published the next day.
So did you always want to become an author? Was that a goal that you were striving towards, or was more just?
When I was in fifth grade on October 10th, 1972, I'll never forget the date. I wrote a thesis, a declaration that I would become an author, and in the vein of Louisa May Alcott and Laura Ingalls Wilder, with whom I now have a lot of problems, even though she was my childhood hero. And that's funny because that really stuck with me. When I was 35, I remember waking up on my 35th birthday and saying, I haven't done this. I haven't done what I set out to do as a kid. And at the time, I was living in Vermont in the woods with, a 4-year-old and maybe a 1-year-old. And I was feeling really trapped by the women who were living around me, actually, who were very anti-Barbie, which is how I ended up writing Barbie Unbound, the parody of the Barbie obsession. And I'm proud to say that was the most shoplifted book in America for one while. It was, I had Bruce Springsteen's agent at the time, and I kept thinking, why would Bruce Springsteen need a literary agent? But boy, was I wrong about that. And it was published by a lesbian feminist press here in Vermont, New Hampshire, and I don't think they'd ever seen a Barbie, but it became a big hit, and I'm glad to see that there's a Barbie movie coming out, kind of picking up on some of the themes. It's been a great evolution. So now, and that led to my first book, Bubbles Unbound, believe it or not. So off, you start anywhere.
And now we come to your new book, which is We Love to Entertain. What can you tell readers about the book?
Well, Love to Entertain is my first book set in Vermont. It's partially based on my own true life experience. And it involves a celebrity rehab couple that goes missing shortly after they acquire a big estate that they steal out from under a crazy Vermonter. So, as my old agent used to say, mayhem ensues. But we get to explore all sorts of different themes: wealth, inequality, a little bit of humor, and what happens when the wealthy meet the crazy Vermonters. And it's something I see every day in my life as town clerk. We're a quirky bunch.
The story is actually told primarily through two characters, Erica and Kim.
Right. Right. Erica is the daughter who is working. She's in her 20s working for the celebrity rehab couple. This is her chance to get out of the small town And Kim is the town clerk mother who, needs to do what she can to keep her daughter safe. Let's just put it that way.
And the book works on a lot of different levels. It's a wonderfully twisty thriller. You throw in something from Erica's past that you have readers wondering, is this somehow connected? You have the couple's kind of dynamics that may lead to motives for them being in or out of the picture, but it's also a book about mothers and daughters. And is that kind of something that you wanted to talk about?
I do. It's funny. The mother and daughters. If I look back on my oeuvre, my 20 books that I've written, mother and daughters are a theme that go throughout almost all my books. My young adult books are heavy with that. And those were published by HarperCollins as well. And maybe it's because my daughter is a very close friend of mine, but she now lives in another part of the world. She lives in Europe. So by writing about her, I keep her kind of close to me.
The mother character, Kim, is a town clerk, as you mentioned, and that's something you do in real life.
Yes.
Did you channel any of your experiences as town clerk into the book? Are there thinly veiled references or people that they're going to read it and say, that's me, or I know that, or?
Well, my former assistant town clerk, who I love very much, read the book and said, I laughed and laughed and laughed, but not for the reasons other people are going to laugh, I don't think. So there are far more secrets in my head than are in those pages, because I do love this community where I've been elected town clerk for the past 10 years. But yeah, there are some elements of the book that I hope make it unique from other books on the shelves right now, because of the unique experience that I've been through, overseeing taxes, tax sales, real estate, and the quirky characters who are in my town, and I'm sure are in every small town and big city.
Yeah. And I think when some people hear the words like taxes and liens and things like that, they're already falling asleep. Basically, how does this relate to a thriller? But you're really quite clever and brilliant about how, is this something unique to Vermont, the way things are set up, that if you do something, it can set up potential legal.
Well, you're right about taxes and people falling asleep. And my editor blue lined a whole bunch of the book that I thought was interesting, but the average person wouldn't find it. I think here's the bottom line. In many parts of the country, including Vermont, if you don't pay your property taxes, the town can take your property and sell it, and you just lose your property, period. And this is not a foreclosure. There's not a huge legal process. It's in Vermont, it was almost like a 6-week process. After that, you have a year to redeem, but a lot of times people don't, because they just don't have the money. I mean, you can lose your house and you can be evicted. And I know that because I purchased a house at tax sale as a town clerk. So I've been through this.
Now, the book is also about reality television and kind of the whole home renovating thing. Are you a fan of HGTV? Is this something that
I am a diehard fan, but I'm also, I think we all find it strangely comforting, and maybe we found it comforting during the pandemic because we weren't getting out as much, so we could go into other people's homes, other parts of the world, and go into their homes. We could find people who were moving to Panama, and why were they buying that stupid condo and renovating it anyway? And how does a couple in their early 30s have $500 to $1 million to put on a house? Who are these people? So I think we're all kind of captivated by the semi-true world of celebrity rehab, and that's where I came up with the idea of applying these two worlds. The worlds collide, and there's so many cliches in the celebrity rehab world, and there were some really fascinating articles I read in the New Yorker and elsewhere about what goes behind the scenes, and so I used a lot of that for this book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to be honest, I'm not a home renovation. I've seen a few of the shows, but I was fascinated by the kinds of research you must have done, like these ranges that are like $15,000 or something, and people have to install them with special technicians. I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's not so bad if you just have to go to Sears and get some.
Those are just the obvious ones. And We have homes like that in my community. You know, we do have people who during the pandemic came from all over the country to flock to Vermont because they figured, well, I can work remotely, and why don't I just buy this hilltop estate for nothing, for about $800,000, when, and you know, which is a $3 to $5 million estate, borders forests for as far as the eye can see, and they're beautiful. So people are snapping up land left, right, and center, and then rehabbing all these homes. And as a result, a lot of Vermonters are getting priced out of their homes. It's kind of becoming an epidemic. But I did learn a lot during that stage of what exactly people were doing in their houses. So some of those luxuries I put into the book, which is making a lot of fun.
You do have a really kind of wicked sense of humor. The two I think they're assessors that go through the homes, and if somebody doesn't
Now, those guys are based on real life, and they are no longer working with my town, but they are definitely my inspiration. I miss them very much. They're gone now, but there's a certain type of quality that somebody who is a property assessor tends to have, and those are the guys in my book.
And it's amazing how sometimes people with all this money are so penny pinching when it comes to paying their taxes. I mean, they want to downgrade everything, but they're willing to spend $1 million to fly around the world.
Well, you know, they didn't get rich by accident. They that tends to penny pinching on actually really productive and worthwhile payments such as taxes, which go towards schools, is something that, you know, they don't see tangibly. So they decide to argue or grieve them, as we say.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process, because you've written a lot of different kinds of books. You've written fiction, mysteries, crime, thrillers, young adult. Does it work the same for every book? Do you have a certain core process, or does each book demand something different from you? What about your recent book? How did that play out?
Well, the recent book I actually wrote in this cabin that we have in the woods. So it was living on set. I have to say that I've been trying really, really hard to improve with every book. And I think that that's what, you know, most authors try to do. And so I often try out new techniques. When I first started writing, I would just slapdash turn out anything and, you know, submit it to my agent and go through that process. Now, and I used to outline stringently and stick with the outline, or else I'd get to 40,000 words and say, this is crap, and go back and write everything. What I'm doing lately is really outlining as much as I can. But then once you start writing, and I'm sure every author tells you this, John, you know, the characters start emerging, and or they don't behave the way you thought they would in the outline, and you kind of have to be flexible. So what I'm doing, there's a really good process that I read, which is draft 1, write the book. Draft 2, write the book you wanted to write when you wrote the book. Draft 3, make it sing. And that's my process now. I am in draft 1 of my next book, and I know that there are scenes I'm going to cut. I know that I'm probably going to end up writing 50,000 words more than I'll ever use, and I will probably end up writing the entire book again, but I need to go through that process, because otherwise I won't know how the characters work.
So it's kind of the process of discovering them through these different drafts that leads you to
Yeah.
the
I wish I were more efficient, but unfortunately I'm not.
It's different for every author. You have to find what works for you. And that's why those kind of professed guides to writing that claim to be one size fits all really aren't that valuable.
Well, my 3rd grade teacher said, Sarah will always do everything the hard way. And I true to this day at age 60. It's okay.
Now with your latest book, because it's thriller, suspense in that genre, and you have multiple kind of storylines going through it, is that really why outlining was necessary, to make everything fit?
I honestly don't know how you write anything suspenseful without knowing who does what and where, and how it ends. I know that I was talking to Tess Stimson, who I really like, and who lives one town over, and she's British. And she said, I just write, I never know how it's going to end. And I think her books are superior. So I was just kind of blown away by that. And I think Hank Philby Ryan, we all know Hank. She
Yeah.
says the same thing when she submits a proposal. They ask her, well, who does what? She says, I don't know, but it all, it all works out. For me, I have to know, because in real life, that's cause and effect. That's why people act the way they do, because they have done something or they are planning to do something. So obviously the way they interact with other characters, the way they talk, the way they think, it's based on what's happened. And so there I have to know who's going to do what. And that's why I have to outline. The problem is, or the challenge is, that when you start writing, and this is kind of the really cool, I think the cool part about writing, is that your subconscious comes into play, and the subconscious starts driving, takes over the steering wheel. And that may sound goofy, but it's what works. And so your conscience drafted this well-planned outline, and you think, great. I mean, I could almost plot it out by day how I'm going to write this book, but then the subconscious comes in, and suddenly there's a friend, or suddenly there's something, someone had a spiked drink that then made them go do something else. You're like, there was no spiked drink in the outline. There was no how did this all happen?
You have been writing for a number of years. You have a number of books to your credit. What has surprised you the most about the business of publishing and being a writer?
Well, I think the most weird coincidences. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think I've seen weird coincidences during writing and interacting, or when you're working on projects. That has really surprised me. And the other thing that's really surprised me is that for such a solitary profession, you can make such great friends. I have made great lifelong friends in this business, people who I may only see at conferences once every 5 years, but thanks to the internet and thanks to our own strange lifestyles and schedules, these are people I always count as dear friends for the rest of my life. And I think that's been the best part. And most surprising.
Have you ever flirted with the idea of indie publishing? You've been traditionally published.
Well, I think my first
Your first one.
Barbie Unbound was the definition of indie publishing. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's changed things for so many authors. I mean, back when you first started out, it pretty much was New York was the gateway to getting something out. Now it's one of those double-edged swords. It's opened the door for so many authors, but I'll be honest with you, because I think you're a very honest author and you're writing. It's challenging for readers, because now there's like so much more to pick through. How do you find the chaff from the wheat, or separate the wheat from the chaff?
Well, when I go to I'm doing an event at Unlikely Story in Plainville, Massachusetts, on April 27th. And one of the authors who I invited to be with me is a woman named Heidi McLaughlin. And I remember Heidi when she was Heidi Bennett, and she was working at the Barrie zoning department here in Vermont. And Heidi is the quintessential case. I mean, she wrote a romance that sold 800,000 copies in something like a matter of 6 weeks. But largely, she had an already ready audience. Not to say that the romance didn't sell, because it was very popular and it became a movie, but because she ran a Twilight fan group for the Twilight. So, she knew her audience, and her audience wanted romances, and she wrote a solid romance for my girl, and there she goes. So I think people look at Heidi and they think, well, if I go independently published, I too can have this kind of success. But there are a lot of factors that play into the success. And of course, there's Colleen Hoover, who, and I do think that certain genres probably lend them to this wild place. I think you have to ask yourself as an author why you want to be published. I think that's the number one. And why do you want to write? Those are two big questions, because writing takes a heck of a lot of time, and then you have to make a lot of sacrifices. You're always the kid who is stuck inside while your friends are outside playing. That's been my experience, and it's tough, but there are rewards. So if you don't want to do that, you just want, I don't know, to be able to say at a cocktail party that you're an author, I suppose that you're in one category. But I think that there are some people who maybe are writing unusual books that maybe are not immediately mass market appeal and who believe in them, then I would do it, but you're right. There's so much out there, even in just traditional publishing, there is tons and tons of stuff out there, too much to read.
I think you once again put your finger on it when you said you have to ask yourself, why do you want to write? What's in it for you? Because I think that's going to determine whether you're happy yourself as a writer.
Yep.
Why does Sarah want to write?
I don't have the compulsion that some people have. I'm not Nora Roberts, who, when she turns in a manuscript, and this is also going to be an antiquated metaphor, puts the paper in the baleen and turns, just for anybody. But I mean, Nora is that. She's talented and she's a born storyteller, and she just writes. But if I don't write, there's a book always cooking in me. So I do a lot of things, like I knit, I crochet, I needlepoint, just got into quilting. It's the same type of urge. You see a product, you envision it, and you want to make it. And that's why I write. I'm just lucky enough to be published.
Well, skill, talent, and things like that also play into it too. But you're right. There's also a degree of luck in getting published, but that's interesting that you approach it from the creative side of it. How would you guide other aspiring writers? What advice would you give to them? What's been most beneficial to you in your writing career?
I think Sarah Paretsky's advice, this is the question I get all the time from women, particularly, and women who have a domestic side to their lives, like home. How do you find time to write?
Yeah.
How do you do it? And Sarah Paretsky had a great line where she said, you just look at, if you want to write this book, you really want to do it, you're going to find a space. If it's going to be in the bathroom, if it's going to be in the heater room, you're going to find a space. So I think the first thing aspiring writers need to do is ask themselves, why do I want to write this? How do I envision this book? How do I envision this project? Do I have the dedication it takes to deal with so much rejection? Because no matter what, you're going to have tons and tons of I don't know. I'm sure in every creative field, there's tons of rejection, but there's tons of rejection. Either it's on Goodreads, or it's on Twitter, or it's your own publisher, your own editor, or you, or your mother-in-law, whatever. There's just tons of rejection. You got to be prepared for it. You got to be able to plow through it. And then if you get there, then you just sit down and you just write. You just write. And you think, I'm going to do 1,000 words this day. I'm going to do 500 every single day. Try to write. Some people say, no, you don't have to write every day. Honestly, some days I can if I just write 10 words, at least I know I've connected with the manuscript. So that's what I try to do. And that advice from Sarah Paretsky to just sit down and write every day, put blinders on, get yourself into the story. That was the most valuable piece of advice I think I ever got.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Sarah as a reader, because as a writer, you're very eclectic. I mean, you've written a lot of different kinds of books. Are you equally adventurous as a reader, or do you stick to one lane mainly?
Well, I do tend toward mysteries and thrillers because they fill that well. They fill that need and they keep me clipping along. But especially when I'm drafting, I try to have palate cleansers where I switch over to some nonfiction. For example, I'm reading a book now called Cults, just cut and dry about cults that have existed, and it's brutal, but it's fascinating. I'm reading, let's see, I am almost done with Rebecca Makkai. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I have some questions for you. It's a hefty book. It's got a mystery thriller component in it, set in a private school in New Hampshire. I thought, oh no, not another separate piece type of thing. It's much better than that. And the writing is superior. And I think it's definitely worth your while. And let's see what else I've got here. If anybody has read Wanda Morris, Anywhere You Run, it's dealing with racism in the 60s, late 50s. 60s, and about sisters coming from the South, and it's it's chock full of information and chock full of insight, both legally and politically, that probably and socially, that a lot of people may not remember or have never known. And so it's definitely worth your while. And this is a book that's been on my nightstand for a long time, Empty Mansions. It was recommended to me by a bunch of authors, but it's a nonfiction story about Huguette Clark, who was found dehydrated and alone, very, very wealthy woman living alone in this Fifth Avenue monstrosity of a mansion. And it just peels back the stories, not only of her, but also of her father, who in the 1800s was a swashbuckling entrepreneur in the West. Let's see, another book that I read recently that I really like is No One Will Miss Her by do you know Kat Rosenfield? Right. And so anything she writes, I will read. So there are some authors like that, Lisa Joel, those guys I'll read no matter what, just because I'm just addicted to them. She really delivers, I think, consistently.
You've written young adult novels. Are you also a reader of young adult? Has that been part of your reading background?
I used to be, when I was writing young adult novels a while ago, and I have to say that the young adult world has really changed since I was writing back in 2006. I think it's improved. It's been great. I was published by Balzer and Bray, and they have been, I think they published The Hate U Give. I mean, those guys have always been ahead of everybody. So that is an exciting world. But you know what? I just got too old for it. When I had middle-aged teenage daughter and son, I was kind of connected, but I'm not connected anymore. And the voices that are coming out they blow me away how cool they are. So, you stand back and you say, let them rip.
And at one point you were writing, and you had said something about this, and I agree with you, what at that time was called women's fiction, which was not exactly the most inclusive.
It's like the women's pages. My father was an editor of a newspaper in Pennsylvania back. And they had the women's pages, and they were called the women's pages, and they would be filled with things like the party line, who over for an afternoon tea, and who threw who a baby shower. And those are the women's pages. I'd hate to see the women's pages now. They'd probably just be slashed with red and black. Yes, I did write women's fiction. I wrote one book I wrote called The Cinderella Pact, was about weight loss, and that ended up being a Lifetime movie of Lying to Be Perfect. And the screenwriter did an excellent job in that, much better than I ever did. She was Phil Silver's daughter. I think I was more thrilled by that than anything else. But that has become a perennial favorite. And I wrote a series of books of women in suburbia, whether they're pinching pennies or we all go through phases in our life, and I guess the books that I've published have been reflective of the phases of my life.
That's interesting. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years or last decade or so about authors developing a brand. And because you're so eclectic, I'm sure your publishers sometimes are pulling their hair out trying to figure out how to brand you.
Yes.
How would you describe your writing style, your voice, is what I like to call it, to readers who may not know your books?
I think that my voice is infused with a lot of humor.
Yes.
And that's how I approach my life. And I would love to be able to write more serious, straightforward books. I'd love to be a Jodi Picoult or Elisa Scottolini. Oh, Scottolini's got some great humor too. But whenever I start writing, the humor comes out. So if you're going to read a thriller, you're not going to read anything that's super violent. You're not going to read, I hope you're going to read something that's going to be suspenseful. I hope you're going to learn something. I try to put something in my books that, informs people about an aspect or a subculture that they might not be familiar with. When I wrote Do I Know You, which was the book before this, also published by HarperCollins, which is my first reentry back into publishing after young adult books, that was based on a super recognizer. And a super recognizer is someone who never forgets a face. And that was based from my being on the terrorist watch list back in the day. And so Yeah, I guess it would be better if I could be branded, have the same font, the same throughout all the covers, right? But I'm not. So
So I think in some ways it's a plus, a benefit and a minus to you because you may get readers who love certain of your books, but
right.
other books will not appeal. But you also get readers who might not want just one kind of book that finds you for something else.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I had a lot of angry readers after I abandoned the Bubbles Yablonsky mystery series back from
Did you abandon it or it was more of a mutual decision by
I think Bubbles went her way and I went my way. And the town of Lehigh, Pennsylvania changed. It was a pink walled hair salon in a blue collar steel town. And I'm not sure those aspects exist anymore. I really love Bubbles and there were some people who just were fanatical about her. But I'd written all I could about Bubbles and it was time to let Bubbles go. And some people are just so disappointed. To this day, I still get emails or comments on social media from people saying, "What are your point? Is it a Bubbles book? Is your new book? Is We Love to Entertain? Is it a Bubbles book?" No, it's not a Bubbles book. I've written Bubbles in 20 years.
that must be tough because they were wonderful. But you're right, at some point, authors need to make the decision it's time to say goodbye. Some authors have not, and you can see it in their work, but readers, I guess readers love characters. They love to identify with someone, and it's hard for them to let go too.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's part of the appeal of Louise Penny's book. I mean, they're well written and they're well plotted and they've got a great setting. But I think also, the next time a Louise Penny book comes out, you can grab it and you're back. Gosh, you're at Three Pines. Yay, And if you dare take them to Montreal, it's like, I'm not sure. So,
I like those books better than I like the ones in Three Pines, but that's just me.
yeah, well, that's why authors love readers because they're not all the same.
It's true. You mentioned it, and if you don't want to go into details, that's fine, but there is something on the horizon for you as an author.
There is. I have another contract with HarperCollins to write another thrillerish suspense novel. And you're right, I'm superstitious for all sorts of reasons why I can't discuss it.
Yeah, that's fine. In addition to writing books, so many authors now have to also be part of the marketing team.
Right.
Their books. What kinds of marketing are you dabbling in? Are there social media platforms you identify with? How can readers discover your books?
Well, I've always I can't say that I'm the hippest social media person around. So I have I have a Facebook page that's for writing, but I also have just my Facebook page, and that's where a lot of people flock to. Sarah Strohmeyer at Facebook. I have a website, sarahstrohmeyer.com. I'm on Instagram that's connected to the Facebook. So Sarah Strohmeyer, it's all one word. I got in early with Sarah Strohmeyer. Whatever his other Sarah Strohmeyer wants to get into social media, forget it. I earn it. But also this time around, I'm trying to do more hands-on quirky stuff. So for example, I have an event coming up on May 3rd here in Vermont, and it involves a great bookstore called Bridgeside Books, an independent bookstore down in Waterbury. And I said to him, what do you think about, since this is We Love to Entertain, what do you think about holding this at the new wine shop that just opened up very near my town clerk's office in Middlesex? And we'll have some wine and some nibbles and we'll do it there. And Bridgeside Books kindly said, yep, let's do that. So I'm trying to also bring people down to this new wine shop. It's also more convenient. It's right off exit 9 in Vermont. And I'm just trying to do a multi-level type of marketing, if you get my drift. So spread the wealth. Let's bring people together because we've been separated during the pandemic. And I think people, need to get out of their grumpiness and begin to know that, oh yeah, I remember why we used to get together and things are fun. And so that's one of my very non-social media events coming up.
Well, you were early on kind of very innovative in your marketing efforts with your Bubbles books, because I remember you came to Scottsdale and scared the daylights out of our cable city staff who adopted In a way, it was brilliant because you became that character.
Well, let me just tell you something. So I think at that Scottsdale event, I was there with Alifair Burke again, friends. So, and Alifair was just starting out, but of course everybody wanted to meet her because she's Jamie Lee Burke's daughter, and she's a lawyer and she's smart and she's intelligent. And there she is standing next to me in a big blonde wig and a see-through leopard print top and the gel-filled leopard print bra. But let me tell you something. That was that Scottsdale event that got me on the terrorist watch list, because
Oh,
I was flying Southwest, of course, I think. And that's when they pulled me over right as everybody's going onto the plane, and they're taking out my suitcase. They're taking out the blonde or the wig.
oh,
And I said to the person who was in charge of the security, or someone there, I said, what's going on? They said, well, you got a little ding on your passport. And I realized then it was because the publicist had booked one-way tickets all across the country in 2001, I think it was, or 2002. And it was 2002. And of course, but none of the tickets were under any of my names. They're all under my author's names. And so all I had to use was my passport. So I guess the combination of my passport, which had a different name than my tickets, plus all the one-way tickets, made me a threat. And I learned at that Scottsdale event. So from there on out, for years and years and years, I could not fly anywhere without being stopped, set aside. It was with my family in the Turks and Caicos. And they went off on one side and I was taken up to a room and I had to take off all my clothes. And I mean, it's just a big pain in the butt. But if I hadn't, I would never have gotten the idea for Do I Know You? Because that came when I was in England, in London, being detained in Heathrow. And I talked to the security personnel there, and they were making fun of Americans for taking off their shoes. And they said, we're just so advanced. We've had people from the IRA threaten us for such a long time that we now have super recognizers milling through the airport. And I said, what's a super recognizer? So you see, it all pays off.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I can't be branded, because I keep going off in different directions, I'm afraid.
Wonderfully uncontrollable and always interesting. I can't believe that our time has flown by so quickly. You've just been a delightful guest, Sarah. Your new book is We Love to Entertain. It's just out. I know anyone who's interested in thrillers with a twist, thrillers with a little bit of unexpected depth and an interesting kind of venue will love it. I hope you'll come back for your next book. We'd love to have you either virtually or in person.
Oh, I would love to. And I'd love to be in person again, because I've never stepped off the tarmac in 106-degree temperatures.
Yeah, if you're coming here during the summer, plan on that. That would be definite. Sarah Strohmeyer's new book is We Love to Entertain. I want to thank her for taking time to visit virtually. And I want to thank everyone else for tuning in to another author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Well, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.